Chanan has performed a variety of roles in and around DC. He's worked at the State Department. He's worked at the Defense Department prior to coming over to the White House last year. He came to the White House, as you may know, in a particularly tumultuous moment for the American Jewish community, right immediately following the Iran nuclear agreement. So his predecessor walked a lot of miles, and I think that Chanan's been walking quite a few himself in the ensuing months. So what we're going to do is I'll ask him a few questions, and then we'll open up the floor and give you an opportunity to ask any questions that I forgot. So without further ado, Chanan, is there anything that, looking out at this crowd, I think that we're all, kind of reassessing the state of American politics today, the state of the relationship perhaps even between the White House and a lot of communities, not just the Jewish community. What would you say about that?
Is this on? It is. Okay.
Yes.
First of all, this year we are going to, I want to make an announcement. This year we're going to have the Chanukah party on January 21st, okay? So we'll figure something out. In terms of the state of the American Jewish community, I think we are at a actually fairly miraculous time in the history of not just the Jewish community, but in the history of the American Jewish community. If you revert back to when I actually first started, the president was delivering a lot of commencement addresses. And I started in the April-May timeframe. And one of the things that he often said to the various communities that he spoke to was, if you look at the history of the world, and you were to say to yourself, at what point would I want to be born? Would it have been the 15th century? Would it have been the early 20th century? Or would it have been now? And the answer is right now. This is the ideal time. Yes, there are problems in this world today, but my God, have there been a lot of progress. And so I would add just a slight corollary to it, which is to say, if you were to look at the American Jewish landscape or just the Jewish landscape over the last 2,000 years, and you were to say to yourself, at what period in the lifespan of the Jewish community would I want to be born? Some people might say the Second Temple era, God bless them, right? I would say right now, I'd say 2016. The American Jewish community is at such a stark space and where we have seen so much progress, where we have accomplished a lot, where we have contributed so much to the fabric of the United States, and where we are more comfortable now than I think we've ever been since the first Jews arrived here in 1654. We've come a long, long way. So then the question beckons, yes, there are problems that exist today. Yes, there's still an uptick in anti-Semitism. Yes, there's an uptick in anti-Semitism on social media and vandalism and epithets thrown at schools and whatnot. But we have come such a long way. What does it mean now to be Jewish in 2016? What is our collective and individual responsibility now in 2016? And I would make the argument that we have an obligation to continue, we Jews have an obligation to continue to look out for each other, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Lazeh, right? On the one hand. On the other hand, we have an obligation to also look out for other minority groups like us.
So, kind of based off of that, obviously we're going to have a transfer of power, oddly concurrent apparently with the adjusted date for the Hanukkah party. But when that transfer of power comes, obviously for the next 2 months, you're going to be working very hard. What are you going to tell your successor, whoever that will be, about how to work with the Jewish community and also how to help the Jewish community form bridges with other communities?
It's a fantastic question, and I'm in the midst of trying to think that through right now. I mean, the most important thing I realized when I first started was, my God, there are a lot of Jewish organizations out there. For every 2 Jews, there are 3 opinions. For every 2 Jewish organizations, there are 4 opinions, right? But it's a good thing, right? It's indicative of the fact that the Jewish community is probably more well organized, more knowledgeable about the issues than we've ever been in the past. And as a result, it's important to develop as many relationships as possible with all these different various organizations, whether you agree with them or not. There needs to be a conversation. And that's something that I tried to do in a very limited time span. Reach out to individuals who didn't necessarily agree with the policies and positions of the United States, of the U.S. government, but important interlocutors. And so from the get-go, reach out to as many folks as possible, and don't allow your political differences to prevent you from building those bridges.
So I remember this exact conversation, I think last year with your predecessor, although I was not the one moderating it. And I remember it the year before with your predecessor, although I was not the one moderating it. And everybody in the audience at the time wanted to hear pretty much about one thing, and that was the Iran nuclear agreement. Now, of course, that was kind of a fait accompli by the time you arrived.
Yeah.
But one of the issues that I think a lot of people touched upon at the time was that you were kind of inheriting a Jewish community somewhat divided and somewhat acrimonious. Have you seen any sort of a progress in that in terms of the Jewish community coming back together again?
Yeah, I think we'll see whether summer 2015 was an inflection point for the Jewish community years down the road, right? And we're still fresh off of that experience. It was a rather unique time in the history of the American Jewish community. Probably saw something comparable in 1981 with the AWACS disagreement. And other comparable situations. But this summer 2015, and look, I want to be on the record of saying this. My predecessor, Matt Nosenchuk, extraordinary. He was probably the equivalent of like the John Madden of Jewish liaisons, right? For those football fans out there, he was, for both in terms of the longevity and in terms of his commitment to reaching out to people that agreed with him but also disagreed with him. He really went above and beyond. And in the process, he taught me a lot about how to approach the position. The American Jewish community was it was a fascinating time to be a Jew in the United States in summer 2015. But it's always a fascinating time to be a Jew in the United States.
So what did he teach you? What were his pointers?
I think some of the things I addressed, and some of which you can read about in newspaper articles about him once he wrapped up. Number one, every voice is important, and whether you agree with them or disagree with them. Number two, solicit the input, because one of the unique jobs, so people sometimes make the mistake of saying that I am the Jewish liaison to the White House, right? Which I'm not. I'm the White House liaison to the Jewish community. But I'm a bridge for various segments of the Jewish community to the White House. In other words, my goal is to ensure that the community understands the policies, positions, perspectives, that's all the alliterative words I know, of the White House. And at the same time, though, I want to make sure that the White House, especially the policymakers, are aware of the policies, positions, and perspectives of the various segments of the Jewish community. Not Jewish communities, not Jewish community. And that's one of the things that he helped me understand.
So about the policy, the position, all of those words that you said so nicely alliterative, in the last elections, and I'm going to have to keep falling back on that, we know that the Jewish community voted something around 70-ish% in favor of Hillary Clinton. When you're trying to bring perspectives from the Jewish community into the White House, how do you deal with the fact that, to a large extent, you're kind of looking at a captive audience, right? You're looking at a 70% voting bloc for a Democratic president and coming back and saying, no, but these communities' concerns are still important, whether or not they're kind of a captive audience. How does that work?
I mean, it's relatively easy for me in this position. It might be a little bit different for the next administration, or not, right? We'll see. I don't want to prejudge what will transpire come January. But for me, it actually happened to be, yes, fairly easy. There are a lot of, and this is, when I've spoken to a lot of different groups, and here's what I've noticed, that there are, and some folks might have heard me talk about, there are Jewish issues and there are issues that the Jewish community care about. And they're not synonymous, but they're also not mutually exclusive. A Jewish issue, forever and always, Israel. A Jewish issue, forever and always, anti-Semitism. A Jewish issue, forever and always, Holocaust survivors, a third of whom fall below the poverty line. A Jewish issue, forever and always, religious freedom. Those are Jewish issues, issues that we, Jews in this room, sitting here, and folks walking around care about by virtue of who we are. But that's not all we care about. There are also issues that the Jewish community cares about because of not, and highest, I'm going to steal this for them, not because of who they are, but because of who we are. There aren't so many Jewish refugees coming into the United States these days, but there are refugees coming into the United States. And you know who care about that? The Jewish community should care about that. There are issues with criminal justice reform. There are issues with poverty. There are issues with food insecurity. There are issues in each of these different tracks. And I have met countless Jewish organizations, issues that define themselves first and foremost as Jewish. I met those are the organizations. They are reaching out to these different constituency groups. So, for example, Mazon, another organization, they brought 1,000 paper plates to the White House the other day. Mazon is an organization that focuses on Jewish hunger and food insecurity, and they brought 1,000 paper plates that they had collected from summer camp kids, writing letters to the president about concerns vis-a-vis food insecurity. Does that impact the Jewish community? Absolutely. Does it only impact the Jewish community? Absolutely not. And so every single day, I can one day get up in the morning and speak to folks from the Religious Action Center. The next day, I'm on the phone with the the next hour, I'm on the phone with the Orthodox Union. Afterwards, I'm having a cup of coffee with an individual from Mazon, Food Insecurity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is fascinating, and something I never necessarily anticipated when I entered this job. But it speaks again to the point I made earlier, which is, yeah, we've come a long way, right? And it's fortunate that we are where we are at this point, and we're all fortunate that we're in this room and we're alive in this time period. And the question then beckons us, what's our responsibility? I'll tell you a quick story, right? This was when I was applying for the job, and I had my first interview in the West Wing, right? And I'm like, this is extraordinary. This is great for a kid that studied this stuff. It's fantastic. And so I go in there and I have the interview. It's for about like an hour. And as we wrap up, I say, listen, my 6-year-old daughter, she just sends her love to the president, right? If anything, you can extend those to the president. And they're like, hold on one second, right? My boss. And she races into her drawer and she takes out a box of M&Ms. And I'm looking at this box of M&Ms, and there are two important symbols. The first one is the seal of the President of the United States, the most powerful person in this world. And I flip it around, and there's the symbol of the OU, demonstrating that this is kosher. And there I am, paces away from the most powerful person on this planet, and I'm looking at a box of M&Ms, and it says that it's kosher. Now, if I stop for a second to think, man, if my great-grandparents saw this right now, what would they think? So I go home and I bring the box of M&Ms to my daughter, and she eats it up within 38 seconds, right? And, a few weeks go by, I luck out, I get the job. It's the night before day one, and I go to say goodnight to my daughter, who at the time was 5, and we say Shema, we say the Hamalach, and I'm about to leave the room, and she says, Abba, she calls me Abba, she says, Abba, 1 second. Come back, and I race back, and I say, what? And she says, can you ask the president for something else for me? I'm like, all right, sure. What do you want, Orly? I'm happy to get you anything. She goes, how about an iPad? I'm like, you know what? God bless. Here we are in 2016, and my daughter feels comfortable enough to ask me to ask the president for an iPad. So I think we're doing all right.
I thought she was going to ask for kosher White House Skittles, because that would really take a miracle.
She actually asked for a Chanukah party invite.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
That's her and me alike. So as we look toward, again, with this kind of retrospective look, but also looking forward, I just noticed on one of my colleagues' websites, I saw on JTA there was this little announcement that Sarah Bard says that she's moving to Israel. Pretty much your counterpart, right, in the Clinton campaign.
She was Sarah, now she's Sarah.
Right. Sarah Bard. I stayed Rebecca in Israel for years. I fought off the Rivka at all costs. But is there something, I know that you were somewhat enmeshed in all of this as well. Is there something else that Sarah and her colleagues could have done or should have done, or was it all as it should have been in terms of outreach to the Jewish community?
So I've never worked in the political space, right? Which makes me a fish out of water, and therefore probably unable to answer that question. Mm-hmm. I spent my career working as a civil servant, and I'm still a civil servant, right, which is, I think, a rather unique thing, because I'm in an overtly political position right now. I represent the White House to the Jewish community and make sure that those policies are fully understood by the Jewish community. So I've never worked on a campaign. Right. I've never worked in a political space before. I'll tell you this much. If you just look at the numbers within the Jewish community in terms of the vote, it was up there in terms, I think, top 4 or 5. In the history of the Republic, in terms of the number of Jews who came out proportionally to vote for the Democratic nominee as opposed to the Republican nominee, and so I think they did an extraordinary job, and I commend them for it.
So I guess this is a good opportunity, now that Chanan has also reminded us that he is not, when it comes down to it, a political operative. That is a good reminder as we go into the question and answer session here. But I would like to open it up for some questions from all of you.
Is your job dependent on who's in the White House? Will there be a change because of parties, or is it unilateral?
I'm not normally a betting man, but I'm going to put $5 on the fact that I probably won't be here in January. But it's a good question.
Can you speak a little bit about the role that Malcolm Hoenlein plays in your relationships with the Jewish community and just speak on that if you can.
Do you work for the conference? Malcolm, you out there? No? I mean, Malcolm is a storied institution. He's been in his position since 1986. I think he carries a lot of weight, and he has he's been around for a long period of time. He understands the issues fairly well, and he's one of those individuals that I speak to fairly often. Sometimes to seek his counsel, sometimes to seek what he's thinking about a certain situation, sometimes to get a sense for what segments of the Jewish community are thinking. And so, you know, he's somebody who's been in this, working at this storied institution for the better part of 3 decades, since I was 3 years old, right? So as a result, he's one of those individuals that I do look to, amongst many who have a unique insight in not just the current policy situation, but in the history of the policy discussions leading up to now. So I wasn't expecting that question, but thank you.
You probably can't answer the question, but I want to raise it because you're the only person we can ask it. Behind the scenes, does the president express some kind of frustration at the barrage of really hurtful responses that he gets sometimes from important segments of the Jewish community, almost no matter what he does? No matter what he does. I don't know how, I'm putting most of the question between the lines here and see if to what extent you want to respond to it. But behind this is a president who doesn't break a sweat. But behind the scenes, he's a human being, and I'm curious
Sure.
how much you can tell us.
Sure. Well, I think that this is a president that so closely identifies with the American Jewish community. I'm not going to debate the Kishka's question right now, but I'm confident that he's an individual who sees the Jewish narrative as part of his own to a certain extent. And, you know, you don't just need to take my word for it. You can look at a lot of the symbolic gestures that are more than just gestures that he has advanced over the last 7.5, 8 years. So for example, the fact that he is the first president in the history of the Republic to host a Seder on an annual basis in the White House, and remember, he's not Jewish, right? Is extraordinary. Why does he do that? And he's spoken about it publicly, in part because he identifies with the concept Meshibud legeula. He identifies with the notion of the Exodus. He identifies with the notion of what it means to go from bondage and from the perils of slavery to freedom. That's something that I think infuses his outlook to a certain extent, and he's been very public about that. The first president in the history of the Republic to speak at the Israeli embassy. Right? It's never been done before, but he did so in January. And if you look at some of the remarks that he delivered at that time, he talked about, and I don't know if he talked about the notion of when I see anti-Semitism happening elsewhere, we need to think the following. I too am a Jew, all right? The President of the United States said that 3 times in his address at the Israeli embassy in January. I cannot imagine Rutherford B. Hayes making that argument, right? I can't imagine, you know, even Thomas Jefferson making that argument. And here was the first African-American president making the argument that when we see prejudice elsewhere, we need to identify with it. And he identifies with it. You know, the first president in the history of the Republic to bestow the Medal of Freedom to a sitting Israeli president. The first president in the history of the Republic to not have 1 but 2 Jewish chiefs of staff. The first president in the history of the Republic, and et cetera, first administration in the history of the Republic to have a sukkah on the vice president's residence, right? That's never been done before. These things I can tell you from peeling back the curtain, none of this happens by accident. It all happens because he feels a direct connection to it. And so this president, to a certain extent, and this is why, as an Orthodox Jewish, somebody who's Shomer Shabbat and Shomer Kashrut, somebody who travels every day from the Shema a small shtetl called Pikesville to Pennsylvania Avenue. This is why I strongly believe that we're going to miss him to a certain extent. And by we, I mean the American Jewish community. Because we've had a fairly good, yes, there have been policy disagreements, but this is a president that identifies with all of us in the room, even if there are policy disagreements. And so for that reason, it's, for me, an honor to represent him in as much as, in the little that I do, but also to work with the community I so closely identify with. And so, it's extraordinary that the president, I'll tell you very quickly, when I briefed the president right before Rosh Hashanah, right? He does this phone call every single year with rabbis, hundreds and hundreds of rabbis around the country. He's done this for each of the last 7 years, and this was his 8th year. So I picked the last straw, and I get to write the talking points, right? Hell of an experience, right? So there you go. There you are. You write the talking points. You give it to the president. You sit on the couch right by the outer oval, and then they say, the president's ready to see you. And you try to keep your cool. And you walk around the side, and you go into the Oval Office, and there is the President of the United States sitting behind the Resolute desk. And he stands up, and my supervisor introduces me, and he says, "Hi, Chanan," and he nails the cha. Nails it. So you want to talk about a guy that identifies with the Jews, nails the cha, right? And a little back and forth, and then we start the phone call, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor of starting the call. So I sit down, I'm in the Oval, I'm sitting in the chair, I'm literally like 15 feet away, eyeball to eyeball, right? And I get on the phone, and I start the call, and I say, Shalom Aleichem, because you got to drop a Shalom Aleichem in the Oval Office. You got to do it. If you have the opportunity, you got to drop Shalom Aleichem. So I drop a Shalom Aleichem in the Oval, and we go through the entire thing. And the president answers a series of questions. And there have been, I think there are 1 or 2 articles that were written about it. We released the opening transcript. But I'll tell you what wasn't released was at the tail end. This is off the record. What's going on here? At the tail end, he, a rabbi asked, so is there one final thing that you would like to address? This is it. This is the last time that you, the President of the United States, is speaking to almost 1,000 rabbis before Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of a new year. Is there one final thing you'd like to address? And he says, a series of different things, but one thing that stuck out in my mind, and again, I'm 15 feet away, he said, thank you to the people sitting in this room and the people walking around and Jews who are not in Washington, D.C. He said, thank you for praying for the safety and security of, for both me and my family, right? Now, I got to tell you, I grew up as in a youth minyan, right? As like a gabbai. And I grew up attending synagogue as a gabbai, and sometimes I am a gabbai in my small synagogue in Pikesville now. And one of the things we do on a weekly basis, we pray for the welfare of the government and the leader. And so there he is talking to hundreds of rabbis around the country, thanking them for saying this blessing about him, something that I had either said myself or listened to growing up my entire life. And that's when I realized, I realized it beforehand, but it just added to the reality that this is a president who gets it. And he gets you. And he gets the Jewish experience in the United States. And he gets the Jewish experience in this world. And he understands us. And so to answer your question, I think he closely identifies with the Jewish community. It's something that we should all be proud of.
I'm so happy the rabbi asked about how the president's feelings are. I have to tell you, I was very embarrassed that when I was at an AIPAC conference, it was my last time that I went to AIPAC, and our community booed the president of the United States. And I was very embarrassed as a Jew, so one note about that. But as I face a lot of anti-Semitism where I'm at. And during the campaign, I faced a lot, and I'm afraid we're going to face more after this new president takes office. Have you experienced the same thing? I know Jewish reporters experience a lot of vitriol and anti-Semitism, but being in your position, did you experience any of that behavior, and are you afraid that after you leave, you're going to experience that as well?
Yeah, I only speak to Jews, so not really. And also, I don't think too many people know who I am. So that I'm kind of under the radar as a result, even though I probably should be more out there. So in short, no, and I think I'm fortunate. But to your point, it's an issue, and it's something that the Anti-Defamation League has chronicled, and it's something that I think Hillels around the country are aware of and focusing on. And I think it's something that we can't take our foot off the pedal on. We have to be aware of each of the different instances that transpire throughout the country, whether it's an act of vandalism or whether it's bullying in a school system or whether it's people issuing, anti-Semitic epithets to an elected official like yourself. We all need to collectively be aware of these, and we need to collectively be aware of similar epithets and whatnot issued against other minority communities.
I'm going to jump in here. Sorry.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
To jump in, though, I mean, you do have another 2 months, and there has been an uptick in these anti-Semitic incidents. Are there steps that can be taken within the framework of the White House or within the framework of your job to try to mitigate the situation?
One thing we need to do is speak out publicly as often as we can. Whenever we see incidents like this, it's always important that at various levels and at various agencies, that someone's out there speaking out about it, that we're on the record condemning it if we see it. We're not going to hit every incident, right? Obviously. But we're going to chronicle it all, and we're going to be aware of it all, and we'll try to pass on this information to the successive administration. And so we do have 2 months left. We're not going to tackle the issue of anti-Semitism by then. This is the age-old scourge that we Jews have been faced with for a long period of time, from the Khmelnytsky pogroms in the 17th century, before that, and all the way up until now. This is something that we, sadly, so here's the reality. We know what it means to be persecuted, so therefore we need to fight against persecution. We know what it means to be discriminated against, so therefore we need to fight against discrimination. Not just us, but for all minority groups. And when appropriate, the White House should, thank you. And when appropriate, the White House and other agencies can and will be out there talking about this issue.
I would like to thank everybody for attending this session and to thank Chanan again for an insightful and enlightening talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.